All right, now, good morning, everybody. Let's see what Kapila says about each element. He told us that yesterday that there's 24 distinct parts of reality. There's 24 distinct parts there's 24 distinct parts of the external reality. I think if you can tally it up, let's do the complete tally. I think if you tally the whole thing, it goes to 27. Let's see. 25th is time. These are things which are not part of the external reality. They're part of the internal reality. Time is 25, and then there's the individual consciousness 26, and then there's the super consciousness 27. So there's 27 total. In reality, and in external, there's 25 elements. So now what he's going to do is he's going to give you more details about each one. And first, he's going to do the grouping of the internal. Okay, so this is a confusing thing, that the external world has its own internal and external side to it. The external world means things which we observe. I think let's define it like that for now. In the observable world, there's an outside and an inside to it. For example, the inside are the emotions that we observe, the thoughts that we have, these ambitions and identities that we have. And then there's the outside world, which is the sounds, the colors, the tastes, etc. So first is now the reason why that's confusing is when you try to look in, you first wind up looking to the internal side of the external world, and then you usually think, well, I'm not this external stuff, but I am this internal stuff. But actually, you're not even the internal part of the external world. An interesting thing. So in other words, we often mistake our emotions and our thoughts and everything for the core of who we are, but they're not the core. They're closer to the core, but they're not the core. That's a good question, Flatlander. Yes, they are. But I don't know if we will call them external in that case. Because I think the real definition of external is extricated from Bhagavan. All right. Anyway, let's get to Kapila's text. He begins to explain the powers and qualities inherent in each of the 24 elements. So each element has a power and a quality. And he starts with the most sophisticated element, which is doership or ahankar. He says, doership. Doership, you know what I mean by that word? Doership means the sense of, I'm going to do something. I can do stuff. I have agency. I can act. That sense. And the things that you want to do is part of the doership. Doership or ahankar is the trunk from which everything else grows. So actually, this is an amazing statement. The entire universe is an offshoot of our sense of doership, ahankar. The mind, senses, and all the elements come from it. The mind comes from the doership. The intellect comes from the doership. The senses come from the doership. The things that the senses sense come from the doership. Thus, it is personified as the 1,000-headed endless deity named Sankarshan. So you get the Bhadrapada nakshatras, which are the abode for Sankarshan. And in the Purva Bhadrapada, you get the external world. And in the Uttara Bhadrapada, you get the basis for the external world, which is consciousness. So remember they said that Vasudeva is Chitta, Vasudeva is Mahatattva, and then Sankarshan. You know, if you're familiar with these kind of things, you get the Chaturvyuha, the fourfold manifestation of Vishnu. Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumnani, Ruda. Vasudeva is Chitta, or pure consciousness, pure sentience. And then Sankarshana is the trunk from which everything grows, like the serpent that has thousands of heads. So Sankarshana is in charge of Ahankar. Sankarshana is Rudra. It becomes now he goes back to talking about what this Ahankar does. He says it becomes a living being's immediate sense of identity. That's its function. Remember we were talking about the sentence, I am blank, fill in the blank. The Ahankar is the thing that fills in the blank. It becomes a living being's immediate sense of identity because it is the immediate root of all intellectual abilities, all sensory functions, and all constituent elements of the body and world. So it's the root of every thought, of every feeling, and of every shape in your body and everything is your ego, your Ahankar. So it's the immediate identity. All these other things are extended identities. The kind of body you have is an extended identity. The way you're feeling, the things you're thinking, the things you believe in are your extended identities. The immediate identity is the Ahankar, which facilitates all those extended identities. And Kapila says it can behave peacefully, aggressively, or foolishly. I would add there, if it's influenced, depending on which of Prakriti's gunas, it's primarily contacting. If it's contacting Sattva guna, then it behaves peacefully. The identity behaves peacefully. It acts peacefully. The identity is the thing that gives us the sense of action. What am I going to do is the basis for our identity. It can be a peaceful sense of action, or it can be an aggressive sense of action. That's when it's Rajas guna is influencing it, or it can be foolish when it's Tamaguna influenced. So now he's going to say this explicitly, because now he's going to explain when it's behaving with Sattva guna, what happens, when it behaves with Rajaguna, what happens, when it behaves with Tamaguna, what happens. So here's his bit on Sattva guna. When it interacts with Sattva, then doership evolves the mind, which is manas. Its function is to make positive and negative judgments. The mind's function is to make positive or negative judgments. So moon is associated with number 2 and a binary. And it fluctuates between full and new. On and off. That's the way the mind operates, is on a binary basis, yes or no, like or don't like. That's why our language has these words. Yes and no. Like and don't like. Now, Abhishek has a question, which is kind of interesting, so I'll take it. Although I was planning on probably not taking questions till particular points. But he wants to know if Ahankar and Swabhava is the same. Swabhava is a general term. Everything has a Swabhava. Swabhava just means the inherent nature. So the character. Character is maybe a one-word translation of Swabhava. The character of a thing. So my glasses have a Swabhava. My hair has a Swabhava. My nose has a Swabhava. The microphone has a Swabhava. The table has a Swabhava. That gives it, makes it what it is, defines what it is. Everything has a Swabhava. Ahankar is a specific material quality. It's a specific material element that allows consciousness to experience its identity, not its own identity, but it allows consciousness to experience identity and develop ambition and desire to act. Swabhava is not one of the 24 qualities. So it's not exactly the same as Ahankar. Okay, now returning to this. Doership is the trunk from which everything else grows. The mind, senses, and elements come from it. Thus it is personified as a 1,000-headed endless deity named Sankarshan. It becomes a living being's immediate sense of identity because it is the immediate root of all intellectual abilities, all sensory functions, and all constituent elements of the body and the world. it can behave peacefully, aggressively, or foolishly. When it's peacefully behaving, it's influenced by sattva, and then it evolves a mind. The result is that it evolves a mind. The function of the mind is to make positive or negative judgments. So now we're not going to talk about ahankar anymore. We're going to talk about manas. What does manas do? It makes a judgment. It evaluates things. And it evaluates on the basis of positive or negative. These judgments are the basis for desires and aversions. Positive judgment from the mind gives desire, and negative assessment from the mind gives aversion, which in turn are the basis for positive and negative emotions. If you ever do the classes with me on the planets, what the planets represent, if you study the moon, you'll see this is exactly how I explained the symbolism of the moon. Why does the moon symbolize emotions? And it symbolizes desires. Because it's the mind. The mind has opinions about things. It evaluates something as being positive or negative. Why is Cancer so opinionated? Because it belongs to the moon. The moon is the basis for opinions. It evaluates things as positive or negative, and then based on the positive or negative, it gets a corresponding desire. So the moon is the basis for everybody's desire. And then based on the plus or minus on the desire, it gets a emotion. So, for example, cookie, chocolate chip cookie. If your mind thinks negative, I don't like chocolate, then your desire is, I don't want to eat that. If somebody puts it in your mouth anyway, your emotion is unhappiness, dissatisfaction, frustration, whatever, some negative emotion. If nobody puts it in your mouth, then your emotion is happiness, peace, calm. Another example, pancake. If your mind happens to evaluate it positive, then it leads to the desire of, want it. Like it, want it. Like it, want it can either be satisfied or unsatisfied. Don't get it, want it, but don't get it, unhappy. Want it and get it, happy. That's how the mind works. So I'll just read that one more time. The moon is binary. The shades of gray are just the variations in the binary. Look at a computer. How many colors can you get on a screen? I remember, like, my dad's day, you get like 16 colors on the screen. 256 colors. Wow. So anyway, like, even if it's just 16, how do you get 16 colors on a screen from a computer, which only has magnets that go on or off? There's no other state to it. It's just on or off. Yes or no, positive or negative. Because when you combine a whole lot of positive and negative, some of them positive, some negative, then you get all these differentiations. So the way the mind actually works is simple binary positive or negative assessment of one thing. But the way reality works is there's millions of things happening at once, which get evaluated at once. So you get all these kind of grayscale spectrum of feelings about things. All right, so to read this again. From sattva, doership evolves the mind. Its function is to make positive or negative judgments. These judgments are the basis for desires and aversions, which in turn are the basis of positive and negative emotions. Now some new material. The mind is personified as Aniruddha, the deity sought by calm yogis. Why the yogis seek Aniruddha? Because chittavritti nirod. They're trying to control the mind. So they seek the personification of the mind. Aniruddha's complexion is dark blue like an autumnal lotus. One meaning of Aniruddha is untamable. Anirudh is chittavritti nirod. Aniruddha's name is Nirud. Nirod is impossible. Aniruddha. The mind is very difficult to tame or harness. Another meaning is master of others. The mind is the master sense. It's named Anirudh. The mind is Aniruddha. The ego is Sankarshan, and the consciousness itself is Vasudeva. The mind is Aniruddha, and Aniruddha means the master, the one who can't be dominated, so it's the master. And the mind is the master sense. All of the senses are feeding their information to the mind. The mind is the whole reason for the senses to give information. And another meaning of anirodh, same meaning, untamable, unbeatable, because it's actually difficult to control the mind. Alrighty? So that is what happens when ahankar interacts with sattva. It behaves peacefully and it creates this reflective energy called a mind, which can reflect on things and evaluate them. But by evaluating them, it generates aversion or attraction. And then by having aversion or attraction, it generates emotions. Now, what happens when ahankar interacts with rajaguna? When ahankar interacts with rajaguna, then the intellect develops. The intellect is a little different than the mind. The mind simply evaluates. I like it or I don't like it. The intellect is not the evaluator of like or don't like or feel. The intellect doesn't feel things. Well, let's see what the intellect does. Intellect's function is to tend the senses by allowing them to identify the objects they perceive. So the intellect is like the shepherd for the senses. And it's like the helper for the senses. The senses don't really recognize, your eye doesn't really recognize anything that it sees. It just reports information. It reports the information to the intellect. The intellect is the one that recognizes, oh, that's a pancake. Oh, that's a window. And then it presents that digested information to the mind, who then evaluates it. So intellect's function is to tend the senses by allowing them to identify the objects they perceive. This effort to identify an object can perceive in 5 ways. Now, if you study the planets with me, when you learn Mercury, you'll learn all about this too. Intellect, because this will explain all of the things that Mercury symbolizes, can be explained by understanding how intellect works. And here's Kapila's dissertation on it. He says intellect, when the intellect tries to perceive an object, 5 things can happen. Let me adjust my seat. Like, let's say you see something, your eyes, or you hear a sound. The intellect is going to try to identify what that sound is. And then there could be 5 outcomes. The first outcome is an accurate identification. The second outcome is doubt. So that's the basic thing. Either the intellect will be able to recognize the pattern that the senses report. When your ear hears a sound, it just hears treble and bass and a wavelength and frequencies, and it reports that information to the intellect. The intellect then matches that pattern of data against things that it knows about. If it finds a match that's clear, then it's done. It accurately identifies it. I know that sound. It's a tuba. I've heard a tuba before. But if it doesn't have a clear match, I think maybe it's a tuba, but maybe it's a rhinoceros. I don't know. Or I've never heard this before. I'm not sure. Then it goes into doubt. And when it has doubt, then it has 3 possible ways of dealing with the doubt. The first way, or the third way that intellect acts, is it tries to reference a recorded log of prior identifications, memory. So intellect is in charge of the memory. When you have memory damage, it's due to Mercury. Though actually, I think it also has to do, to be honest with you, to be accurate with you, I think that Mercury is like on your computer where you have the needle, in the old computer with the hard disk, the needle that reads the disk, or like on a record player, the needle that reads the record. Mercury is like the needle, but the record itself is in chitta, and the memory is stored as samskar, or grooves, on the record or on the disk. So you can get memory problems astrologically in 2 ways, by through Mercury or through Moon. If it's a damage to Mercury, then the problem with the memory is difficulty in accessing the memories. And if it's a problem with the moon, then the difficulty is in imprinting or storing the memory. But this is one of the things that Mercury does, is it will access memory and it will keep memory organized. So if it hears a sound, for example, or sees a sight that it can't understand, it's going to access its records and see if it ever identified something that matches that before. If that, you're good. Then if it may, after accessing records, it may be able to then identify it accurately. So then it's done. But if not, then it'll go to the fourth state, which is where it just sleeps. And this is what wise people do. When they can't figure something out, they sleep on it. They go neutral on it. They say, oh, I don't know what it is yet. I'll wait for more information. So when the intellect functions properly and it can't understand something or figure something out, it just waits. It waits for more information. Or it may be foolish and do the fifth thing, which is to make a guess anyway. Or it may need to make a guess because it may be an emergency situation. It may make a guess. I'm just going to guess that that's a tuba. And if it's a rhinoceros, I'm really screwed. But, so that's how intellect works. It tries to figure out what a thing is. Either it can do it right away, or it gets questions about what it is. When it has questions about what it is, it looks into its memory to see if it has references to the thing that it's experiencing. Usually it can solve it that way. Like, think about when you hear a word is a pattern of information. If I tell you a word like snuffleupagus, you might not know what that is immediately. But if you look in your memory banks, you might find a TV show called Sesame Street somewhere there where you heard that sound before, snuffleupagus. It's this fuzzy kind of big gigantic elephant. So then you would perform that third step where you didn't know what something was initially, but after thinking about it, you remembered what it is, snuffleupagus. Or maybe you'll find nothing in your memory that identifies what snuffleupagus is. So then you'll either say, I'm just going to put a question mark on that and say, I don't know what it is, and wait to see if I know it in the future. Or you might do the fifth thing, which is try to make a guess. I guess snuffleupagus is a kind of a sausage. And you probably be wrong. That's how intellect works. Now, we'll go to the next. So when ahankar behaves peacefully, it interacts with rajas and it generates a mind which just reflects on information. When it behaves passionately or aggressively, then it interacts with rajas and it evolves intellect. Why is intellect aggressive? Because it initiates action. It actually, he's saying that it perceives the input from the senses, but intellect also tells the senses what to go and find. So if it goes to this fourth state where it can't figure out what something is, it's usually going to direct the senses to go and find out more information about it. Engelbert Humperdinck. Now, the third way that ahankara can act is foolishly, or in other words, if it interacts with tamas. When it interacts with... Oh, wait, there's more about intellect. Good. There's more about intellect. Kapila says, intellect evolves from rajas because it is so intertwined with the sensory instruments that also evolve from rajas. Of these senses, 5 input data about external objects into the intellect and the other output efforts from the intellect towards the external objects. So here he mentions that the intellect also directs efforts. It's receiving information from the input senses, the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and skin. But it's also directing efforts through the active senses, the hands, the speech, the feet, and the reproductive and the evacuative organs. And because the intellect is directly involved with the senses, it's rajasic or active. And then he also specifies that the senses link to the intellect via a conductive oxygen called prana, which is a vital form of air that empowers the output senses with the ability to act and the input senses with the ability to perceive. So prana is an important part of the nervous system. Basically, What happens when, in modern terms, when ahankar interacts with rajas, it creates the potential for nervous system, the blueprints for the nervous system, where there's a central processor that inputs and outputs to senses. And so the back and forth thing is the prana and the energy that flows back and forth from the brain to the senses. It doesn't initiate action, actually. I think it's the mind which initiates, but it coordinates the action or it plans the action. Yeah, this is really actually useful, practical information that pretty much is the basis for biology and neuroscience and everything. Now, let's see, we could do this part too. I think I can give you another 15 minutes. He's going to now talk about what happens when a ahankar interacts with tamaguna. Seeing his sagacious mother alert and wrapped in attention, Kapila next described the powers and qualities of the tangible elements, all of which evolve from space as a result of gradual changes facilitated by long stretches of time, the supreme catalyst. Do you get that? Everything is going to evolve under the influence of a long period of time, which is the primary catalyst for evolution. Gradual changes. This is defining evolution, right? It's gradual evolution, changes over a long period of time, allows things to change into more and more complex forms. That's the basis for evolution. All anti-evolution people who go around, probably who came out of a Christian background and go into a Hare Krishna environment and then start throwing the Bhagavatam around, trying to smash evolution, have a little bit of reading to do. Because Kapila is describing the basis of evolution right here. So, what Kapila says, in time, doership evolves tamas into space. The tangible quality of space is sound, which the ears perceive via the ability to hear, and which conveys meaning, allowing one's inner vision to be transmitted. That's what sound is for. Sound is, if you're a musician, is this not the truth? Or if you're a speaker or something, is this not the truth? But even if you're just a musician, not any form of sound allows the inner vision to be transmitted, because sound conveys meaning. Functionally, space creates distinctions between here and there. Here and there. So space allows there to be a sense of here and there and provides an area in which all other elements can operate. Okay, so time causes tamas. Time allows rajas to transform. Time allows the ego, the identity, the ahankar, to transform tamas into space. What does space do? It allows wavelengths. It has dimension to it. Because it has dimension, then you can perceive the different dimensions and different sizes of waves, which is the basis for sound. And so it generates the basis for sound, hearing, and for ears, the perceptive organ. The function of sound is that it allows communication. See how close space is? Space is super subtle. It's the most subtle physical element. So it allows you to transmit the mental and intellectual things, the emotions and the ideas, through a physical form to another entity. It provides a distinction between here and there and gives an area in which other elements can operate. Sound is a wave. Waves are motion. When space exhibits tangible motion, it becomes known as air. So the fact that space can facilitate waves causes it over a long period of time to become air. Because air is movement in space. It's detectable space. Thus, sound waves eventually cause space to evolve into air. The tangible quality of air is touch. Skin houses the tactile sense which perceives touch. Touch reveals qualities like softness and texture. Functionally, air carries sound and other substances. See this? Air carries sound and other substances, moving them apart or bringing them together, and vitalizes all the senses. Sanskrit word for space is either akash or ka. Friction of touch evolves air into fire. The tangible quality of fire is light. So fire is heat, right? Space lets you have waves. Waves move, that generates the sensation of movement, which is touch, which is air. And then the sensation of movement generates heat, that creates fire. Fire gives off light. The friction of touch evolves air into fire. The tangible quality of fire is light, which eyes perceive via the ability to see, and which reveals shapes, colors, and sizes. Functionally, fire generates warmth, which digests and evaporates, generating hunger, thirst, and metabolism. So these are the powers of the elements. If sound provides meaning, why do we find it difficult, Bardo asks, to directly access meanings of other languages? Sound conveys meaning, but it doesn't mean it's easy to convey meaning. It means it's possible to convey meaning. It's easy to convey simple meaning, but it's difficult to convey sophisticated meaning. Like if I go, bah! You don't need to know that language. That's a simple meaning, like you better watch out. But if I try to read the Bhagavatam to you, you need to know the language. It's sophisticated. It'll be more difficult. All right, now what's going to come after fire? The warmth of fire causes air to precipitate water. Evaporation from the air generates water. I knew I would scare you, Miss Vinay. Told you. The tangible quality of water is flavor, which the tongue perceives by the ability to taste, which reveals astringency, sweetness, bitterness, acidity, saltiness, and sourness. Those are the 6 tastes. Astringency, sweetness, bitterness, acidity, saltness, and sourness. Functionally, water moistens, which allows softening and coagulation, relieves pain, nourishes, satisfies, and quenches thirst. Particles associated with flavor coagulate into sediments, which evolve into earth, the most solid form of matter. The tangible quality of earth is fragrance, which the nose perceives via the ability to smell, which reveals the ingredients of an object. That's what smell does, actually. It reveals the ingredients of an object. And describes their condition. The smell will describe the condition of an object as normal, wonderful, spoiled, burnt, and so on. By smelling something, you could tell if something is okay, or super, or old, or infected with something. By smell, you can tell because the smell is actually taking particles from the thing, solid particles from the thing. So you get an example of the actual object. So you can tell what it is. Functionally, earth provides enduring tangible structures for things and the ability to contain all other elements without them losing their individuality. Earth can contain water, fire, air, and space without changing them or merging them into something else. There are several ways to perceive any element, but each has an essential sensation as its primary quality. For space, the primary quality is sound. For air, it is touch. For fire, visibility. For water, taste. For earth, fragrance. Elements evolve as a result of their primary quality. Since they evolve sequentially, the qualities of the former persist in the qualities of the later. The first element, sound, can be heard. The second element, air, can be heard and felt. Or maybe I should put it the other way around. The first element, sound, can be heard. The second element, air, can be felt and heard. I don't know, whichever way is easier for you to understand. Fire can be heard, felt, and seen. Water can be heard, felt, seen, and tasted. Earth having the qualities of all the elements, can be heard, felt, seen, tasted, and smelled. In our world, elements are mixed together and very difficult to isolate, Kapila says. There is almost always moisture in air, for example. So we sometimes seem to taste the air. Minute particles of earth are almost always in the rain, so we seem to smell the rain. Okay, that's Kapila's description of the evolution of the external elements and what those elements do. If you're a physicist or a scientist or something, you probably want to spend 2 weeks or something just, digesting all of this. But if you're not, then 20 minutes is enough. All right, so I'm going to hit the road. Today is Thursday. I got lots of stuff to do, lots of scheduled stuff to do. Yeah, that is very interesting, Ms. Vinay, how the modern science kind of gives off the airs of having birthed itself, but actually modern science is based on older sciences, which are, and this is the supposedly the original one, Sankhya. Okay, guys, have a good Thursday, and I'll see you tomorrow for one more. What's tomorrow? Because you're smelling your own breath, Bardo. Universal. The next thing Kapila is going to talk about is how the elements go from being disjointed to being combined and forming complex structures. Okay.